Well, hello, everybody, and I am so excited to welcome everyone to this wonderful interview series that we are doing for our Unbound devotional, our Unbound Advent devotional this year, and which is called Trans Advent, which centers the voices of trans people of faith and how they experience this time of year and this season in our calendar, in our liturgical calendar, and what it means for them and all those things. And so we're very excited to start off this series with a wonderful, wonderful guest and writer for Trans Advent. And Moses Hernandez McGavin is writing for the first Sunday of Advent. So you're starting it out, Moses. And
Yes.
so I am very appreciative of you for doing this with us and for being a voice and putting that out there. I know in a time such as this, that can be very risky. And so I really appreciate you and the work that you do and the work that you've done for this series. And so to all of our writers, I do know
Mm.
that in a time such as this, being so forward facing can be a risk. And so I am so very appreciative of you and the other writers that are doing this. And I wanted to name that as you view these videos and listen to these wonderful people who do such great work. And so Moses, tell all the people out there a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lee. I'm really grateful to be here and be a part of this series. Like Lee said, my name is Moses. I use the pronouns he, him, or they, them, and I currently work as the Young Organizers Survival Co-organizer with the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. And so we're working to bring young folks across the country, young faith leaders, young organizers, young activists together for a 7-month organizing experience. And I'm also with Transmission Ministry Collective. And so I served as we're an organization that serves trans and non binary Christians nationally in an online faith community. And so I helped to run our general support groups there and also served as the community program coordinator there as well. And so just really grateful to be here for this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we have partnered with all those organizations. And just to make it accessible to people, we will put links in the description down below, and just to make sure people can have access to all those resources. And they will also be featured in our little Advent calendar that we're doing, which we will center, a lot of trans saints that's what we're going to call that have gone before us or who are doing the work now that people need to be aware of, featuring organizations that people need to be aware of that support and are in solidarity with our trans siblings. And yeah, that'll all be in our little Advent calendar that we're doing. And so y'all can check that out when in the devotional as well. But Moses, I do wonder, since you are starting off this wonderful devotional, I do wonder, as you were writing, what kind of came up for you in this time of Advent, this
Mhm.
season of, waiting and preparing for the Christ child to come? What does
Mhm.
Advent right now mean to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I feel like in this, well, first of all, I was thinking a lot about Jesus's time and Jesus's movement. And, Jesus definitely later in his life, but I think the context was still the same when
Mm,
he was young, which is that, they were living under very oppressive and very brutal times. And very dangerous times. The economic conditions were really harsh, the political conditions were really harsh. And so there was really a lot that they were up against, which is kind of what it feels like nowadays.
mm,
And I feel like there's this question too, because I feel like right now it almost feels like we're always waiting for the next thing to drop, or
yeah,
we're waiting for the next thing to come. We're waiting for, what is to come. And the future does look very dangerous. And we know that really we're heading towards even more dark and dangerous times. But then the question is, when you're waiting, right? What does that mean to wait?
yeah.
I think for many of us, for a lot of reasons, because of how we were taught that change happens, because we were told about how change happens, we can find ourselves waiting for the right person to come along, right? We're waiting for the politician who's going to stand up and fix everything. We're
Mm,
waiting for the leader who is supposed to come and, change everything. But really, actually, I think what we can learn from Jesus and from the other trans saints too that you were lifting up is that actually we are the ones that we've been waiting for, right?
yeah.
We have to look around at one another and realize the only ones who I think can actually take us out of this position are those of us who are hurting the most and are really up against the most. And so I think that's what I'm thinking of. I feel like in a time of waiting, I think the time is way past where we can kind of sit back and hope and think that something else will come along or that something will be fixed. And I think we have to realize that we have to start in this waiting to continue to prepare ourselves and our communities for how we're going to both take care of one another, yes, but also how we're going to fight for a kind of system that is also going to take care of us in the way that we need.
Yeah, we always are looking for that savior that
Yeah.
we have these savior complexes, and I was
Right.
just talking to someone the other day about, they're like, "Well, what if we elected that person? If we had only elected, Kamala, we would
Right.
be here and there and everywhere." And I
Mhm.
always remind people that it is not, even with Trump, it is not just him. It is a
Okay.
ideology and systems that have been in place for a very long time, and the
Mhm.
people that we might think are saviors of us are also in those systems that,
Mhm.
everybody is not above falling into these
Mhm.
systems. And so I do think
Mhm.
it's so important for people to understand that, as you said, we are the ones that are going to be here for each other. We are the ones that
Mhm.
are in our communities and know what's going on. And that's such an important reminder, especially now when we
Mhm.
are in a time of waiting and Advent, and we hear all these stories that lead up to Jesus being born, that are so
Mhm.
centered in community. They are centered
Mhm.
in, waiting for maybe a savior, but I don't think they necessarily were waiting for a specific person. They were really waiting for a movement, something to
Mhm.
change. And I think
Mhm.
that is what Jesus embodies right now, for us to not see Jesus as a sole person, but as the embodiment of a movement. And I've really been thinking about that
Mhm.
lately. And I think
Mhm.
our queer and trans siblings can really speak into that, because we're talking about
Mhm.
embodiment and
Mhm.
how we move and act throughout the world. So I wonder what you think about that, because I do know embodiment is going to come up a lot in this devotional.
Mhm.
So I wonder what you
Mhm.
think about that, as like Jesus being kind of this embodiment of a movement, and
Mhm.
how that might move us differently right now.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think what really centers me when I am calling on support from Jesus and really calling on kind of Jesus to be with me and support me is really this knowing that what Jesus was doing was building a movement and
Mm,
he was going to the poorest and most devastated parts of the Roman Empire and finding young poor fishermen and saying, you are a leader. You have something to say, you have something to offer, come and join me. He wasn't going into the big beautiful temples, he wasn't going into the rich communities and trying to find that. No, he was going to the people who were the most hurt by the system
mm,
and saying that they had a stake in this, and not just that they had a stake, but they could really be leaders in bringing about the change, the world that they really knew was supposed to be, because they could feel the most what it felt like not to have that. And so I think you're exactly right that it's not just Jesus, right? The reason that this has been carried on for so long is because there was a movement that came after that. There was a movement of building folks and demanding, right, a different kind of system and a different kind of way of life. And I think that for trans folks, I think that is such a part and embodiment of our own history. I
mm,
mean, I feel like for so long, and for, decades, more recently, I think for decades, our community has had to find ways to take care of one another. We've had to find ways to support each other with medical care, with housing, with food, with clothing, because there were so many movements or so many politicians or so many organizations that really abandoned our community. but
Yeah.
the but we took it upon ourselves then to build out these systems and these projects of survival to support one another, and to also politicize those and ask, why is it that we're being left out of this? Why is it that the system isn't caring for us? And so it's so much a part of our history, that we have had to live in community, and that we have had to struggle as community because we have been kind of so left behind. And it's
Mm,
actually the people that Jesus in his time was organizing, was the people who had been left out, was the people that had been pushed to the side. And so I really do think that trans folks, alongside I think other folks who in this moment have been the most abandoned. So if we think about immigrants, if we think about homeless folks, folks who have been totally pushed out and cast aside, were the ones that were really building the movement in Jesus's
mhm.
time. And so I think really seeing and embodying ourselves and is an exact is actually that we are actually maybe the most capable of bringing out the kind of change and the kind of future that we need, because we know the most what it feels like not to have a system that really works for us. And I would say that's a huge part of our history as well.
Yeah, and I do think that all these all these systems and these folk that are perpetuating systems of oppression see
Mhm,
that and know the power in
mhm,
it. And I do think
mhm,
that these systems are threatened by the folk who are the most cast out. And I think
mhm,
that what we're seeing now is so intentional because they see
mhm,
the power in it. And for me,
mhm,
that power, because it is so threatening, but also seeing the resilience in,
mhm,
I'm a part of the queer community. I don't identify as trans, but
mhm,
because our community can do a lot better to support our trans siblings and non-binary
mhm,
siblings too. And I'll call them out right here and say we can do a lot better because there is transphobia in our community. But I
mhm,
do see that resilience within trans and non-binary people in how life is lived, in the solidarity and the ability to organize and create community, but also the
mhm,
ability to be who you are and the joy
mhm.
in that. And I think that that is so
Absolutely.
important for people to be reminded that whatever you see on the news and all this rhetoric against our trans siblings, I hope that people can open their minds to the joy of seeing someone be who they are and be who God created them to
Mhm,
be, because there's nothing like it. It's nothing like seeing
mhm,
someone live into who they are. And so that to
mhm,
me is also that resilience piece, that because of that embodiment and that search for that identity, there's so
mhm,
much there's so much there that
mhm.
radiates out, and that is so powerful, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I do know there are a lot of people out there, a lot of our trans siblings who, I mean, because of all these systems and the things we're hearing, are having a very hard time. And
Mhm,
I'm going to be asking writers, you're the first one, but I'm going to be
mhm,
asking writers to put out a word for our trans siblings out there who may be struggling or may be trying to find who they are and that identity and that journey, and who are going through so much because of being targeted by legislation, state and federal, by faith communities. And this is a faith publication, and we want to make sure we
mhm,
denounce any faith community that is going after trans people and saying they're not loved or not made in the image of God, because that is absolutely false. But I do
mhm,
think th- we can all use a word, but I do think our trans siblings need that word. And so, what is that
mhm.
word that you would give out to
Mm.
the trans community?
Yeah. Um, I think that, I think there's a couple things maybe. I think the first thing is that I just want to name and really put out is that transphobia and homophobia is not innate. It is not something that people wake up with and decide. It is not something that is actually natural. But in this country, it's actually a part of a political project. It's a
Mm,
part of something that groups like Focus on the Family, like the Family Policy Alliance, like the Heritage Foundation have spent years workshopping, funding, doing focus groups, doing polling, having conferences, really developing and putting out this ideology that then they have disseminated to communities across the country, really with the hope and the idea that what this will do is divide our people.
right.
And what this will do is tell people that trans people are the problem. And it's not the fact that they don't have food or secure housing or stuff like that, but instead what they should be focusing their attention on is trans folks.
Mm,
And I say that because I think that it's really easy for us to feel like it is natural, right? Or it is something that like
yeah,
people are just waking up and deciding. But I reject that, and I
yeah,
actually say that this has been a part of a political process. There is nothing wrong with you. It is, trans people have been around and existed for as long as human beings have existed,
yeah,
and so this is not something new, but this political project is new. And the way that this has been pushed out is new in terms of this expression of it, which we're feeling right now.
yeah,
And so I think that's important to ground ourselves in. And I think the other piece that I would say too is that I think kind of what you were talking about, Lee, is that I would actually argue that being trans, right, and exploring yourself in this deep way and having to just like wrestle with your own creation and wrestle with like how you choose to show up in the world and what that means to you brings you so much closer to God than I think
mm,
people realize, and helps you wrestle with a piece of spirituality and with God in a way that is such a gift. And so actually what you have to offer, what you have to say, what you have experienced is a gift that is a gift that all people actually could benefit from, and that all people benefit from by witnessing the courage that it takes to be able to do that. And I think that the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, this is 3 words, but the last thing I'll just say is that you have to find community, which I
yeah,
know is really hard. And but I think that there are ways to do it. And so Transmission Ministry Collective is an online community. And so no matter where you are, you can plug in and you can find people. And there's also ways that you can find community. You might be able to find community where you are in terms, are there organizations, or there groups? I would invite folks to come to Freedom Church of the Poor with the Kairos Center. Just we can't go through this moment alone. And
yeah.
so, um, even though I feel it can be difficult and wanting to be in isolation sometimes feels safer, I think ultimately the only way that we're going to get through this is together. And so, how can you find ways to lean into community? And how, if you already have community, can you lean more into that? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate that. And again, y'all, yeah, those organizations, we'll have a link to them in the description below so you can get connected to those organizations that do wonderful, wonderful work. And Moses, I am so appreciative of this time with you. And thank you again for writing for Trans Advent. And I think people, are going to connect with this. And I do hope this pushes people into action and to making change and finding that community, and also doing some self discovery and some identity work that I think is so very important, as you were saying. But Moses, thank you. Thank you for talking with us. And again, thank you for writing for this devotional.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. I really appreciate it.
And so, just to remind everybody that you can find Trans Advent at justiceunbound.org/Trans Advent, and that link will be in all of the descriptions of the videos. So, we will have more videos and more interviews with our writers of Trans Advent. All of them will be on here, and you can find them on our YouTube channel, which there'll be a link in the devotional. And again, check it out, justiceunbound.org/Trans Advent, and we will see you again with our next writer interview.